Welcome to Truth, Money, and Freedom. Today is Wednesday. It is the 27th of March, 2019. Here's a story I want to share with you guys, and it goes into things we talk about in Truth, Money, and Freedom here. Mom ignores doctor when her sick 2-year-old starts feeling better. Child Services sends out a SWAT team. So I'm not going to read this whole story to you. I really should, actually, but I'm not going to. I'm going to try and keep this short. I will link it below. Let me give you the fundamentals of the story here. Mom takes child to the doctor, has a fever slightly over 100 degrees, as it says right here. Doctor told her to take her to the emergency room, fearing that because the boy was unvaccinated, key word here, unvaccinated, perhaps he had meningitis, a life-threatening disease. Well, that's the first thing I think when a kid has a fever is it's meningitis. But at any rate, I digress. I'm going to continue now. The doctor called the hospital to alert them, but by the time the mother and child left his office, the boy was laughing and playing with his siblings. According to this excellent piece by Diana M. Names in the Arizona Republic, Mom took his temperature again, and it was almost normal. So instead of going to the emergency room, the family went home. Mom called the doctor to say the boy's fever is broken and she wasn't going to the emergency room. The doctor said she should go anyway. She agreed she would, but then she didn't. That's when the madness began. The hospital called the doctor to tell him the toddler had not arrived. The doctor called DCS. A DCS requested the cops check on the family as a caseworker headed over. And then, according to the Arizona Republic, this is where it gets crazy. It's about 10:30 p.m. Two police officers knocked on the family's door. The officers heard someone coughing. Officer Tyler Casio wrote in a police report that he knocked on the door several times, but no one answered. A neighbor approached, basically said, this is a good woman, she's a good mother. And they said, well, they just want to speak with her. So the DCS caseworker arrives and updates the police on the toddler's fever and the mother's choosing not to take the child to the hospital. The officer called the family's doctor, presumably all from the driveway of this family here, who repeated her recommendation that the mother take the child to the hospital. About 11:30 p.m., the caseworker informed officers that DCS planned to obtain a temporary custody notice from the judge to remove the child for an emergency medical aid. Just after midnight, the caseworker gets the notice, which is required by law. Matters subsequently escalated. Okay, basically Casio wrote that the officers consulted with the police, Criminal Investigations Bureau, and SWAT. Based on the court order, the intent of DCS to serve the order an exigency, whatever, to ensure that the health and welfare of the child. The decision was made to force entry to the home. Interesting. If the parents refused to respond to verbal requests, according to police records. Police knocked, saying that they had a court order and they would force entry if needed, according to police records. And force they did. It was after 1 p.m. when officers kicked down the family's door. One officer carried a shield, while the other was described as having lethal coverage. It's, like with a weapon. Officers pointing guns yelled. Chandler Police Department and entered the house. The rest of the story is equally nuts. The kids were all placed in separate foster homes. When the case got to juvenile court 10 days later, DCS requested it be closed to the public. The judge refused. But then it seemed as if the DCS decided to make everything harder for the parents. This is where TMF comes in, because now the press. Well, actually, we got we're interested in this story even at the very beginning, but now the press was interested, and it was the Arizona DCS Oversight Group, a local organization that fights for families' rights, and a state legislator gets involved in this, Kelly Townsend, who had helped write the law requiring the DCS get a warrant before removing a child. So Townsend had been lobbying zingers like, what about the parents' rights to decide what's best for the child? Parents felt the child was fine. Next thing we know, the Gestapo is at their door. In court, DCS tried to convince the judge, let's see, Jennifer Green, to bar the press from covering the dispute. A lawyer for the agency even claimed that the parents had gone against the best interests of the children by involving the media. Interesting. Green rejected the argument, saying, "In Arizona, we like our courts to be open." However, the judge ultimately sided with the DCS, ruling that the children's removal was lawful and telling the parents to remember that the state had them on a family reunification plan and wants them to regain custody of their children. The children's grandparents are undergoing DCS review and hope to be permitted to temporarily shelter the kids once that's approved. But there's no telling how long it'll be before the kids can just go home to mom and dad. Okay. Yeah, I want to bring up several points with this story here. Several points. I meant from, from my perspective. Number one, let's start with mom choosing not to vaccinate her kids. Now, that's a decision that the parents make, and it is not a decision the state makes. The state tries to make the decision. You can easily get out of vaccination by taking a religious exemption, or there's other means as well, because we do know that there is a lot of circumstantial and some direct evidence that vaccinations can cause autism. Now, I know that that's a sticky point, and that's probably going to get me flamed in the comment section, but if you guys look up CDC whistleblower vaccination, you'll find a lot more information on this. The CDC has known it for a long, long time, and they have covered it up. So that's point number one. Mom and dad don't have to vaccinate if they don't want to. Point number two, she may not have gone to the hospital because they don't have, really nice insurance. Maybe when they go to the emergency room, it's going to set them back $500, maybe $1,000. Maybe they don't have that kind of money laying around, and the fever was broken. Therefore, the emergency room trip was not warranted. We don't have any specific evidence on this, but from a libertarian point of view, you don't use emergency services unless you absolutely have to, because you're basically using up resources that other people may need, and if you're using them and you really don't need them, basically then other people can't use them. This is the kind of thing that drives up the cost of healthcare, drives up the cost of insurance. So maybe that may be in play here. It could be. Now, my next point is very simple, and it's an assertion. It is because I'm not going to look it up right now. I'm curious about why the doctor called Department of Children's Safety in Arizona. I'm very curious about that, actually, because I don't know that that's actually part of their mandate for the doctor to do that. And I'm wondering if the doctor did it because the doctor was, concerned because the child was unvaccinated. With the unvaccinated word right here, that actually there may be something inside of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, that unvaccinated kids with fevers need to be treated like they have leprosy or something. But I digress, but you understand my point. Why did the doctor call the government? Now, the government's actions, I don't approve of, nor do I can't condone them, but that's the way they are. So the government has authority over you in your life, and they have authority over your family. And that's just the way things are here in America. So basically, they were activated by Child Services, and so they had a very specific mandate at that point, which is to get the kid. So they just did what they were, advised to do. So I'm not going to fault the police here. I'm going to fault them for causing property damage. I think that was completely unnecessary. But I was not in the policeman's shoes. I don't know what was going on there. But they went in there. It was a SWAT team. They kicked down the door, apparently. And the screenshot is the security footage. In other words, the family actually had security cameras around their home, so they actually were able to get this picture off that. Once again, I'm going to continue on here. The fact that there was a a temporary custody notice to remove the child for aid is very interesting. That means the parents couldn't even go with when the police took the kid. So to quote unquote the emergency room, probably to find out there was nothing wrong with the kid at all. The fever had already broken. And we go deeper and deeper into the story, and we have we have the break-in by the officers there. The door is kicked down, and then lethal coverage, which means that they've got live guns there. They're literally covering the house, but the officers have to protect themselves. So I get that part. But breaking down the door, pointing guns at people, it may not have been necessary here. The escalation is pretty extreme given the case here, where parents simply didn't take a toddler to the emergency room. Okay, and now basically the media gets involved. The state government is getting involved because the parents are trying to get their kids back, and they can't get their kids back. Now, why is that? Why is that? Now, I would very much like to know why the kids cannot return home to mom and dad. And in fact, the kids are in foster care right now, while grandparents are undergoing a review to hopefully be permitted by the government to temporarily shelter their own grandkids. This is just insane. If you ever, it reminds me of that Hillary Clinton saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I really strongly disagree with that. That's a very socialistic or communistic point of view. I think, parents are generally very capable of raising their own kids and making good decisions for their kids. In this particular instance, the escalation is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. But things like this do happen, especially to people who homeschool. You can actually search this online. There's tons of stories where they get very similar treatment from the local government there because the kids are not in school, but they're homeschooling the kids, and the government knows it. In fact, there are movements across this nation to make homeschooling illegal because they want you in the government indoctrination centers known as public schools, or they want your kids in there. So, but I don't know. I mean, I brought this story to your attention really to show you how badly things escalate when the government gets involved. And so that was by the doctor. The doctor involved the government. But this is what happens when government gets involved when you're trying to make family decisions. And I've got my own personal stories. For instance, my grandmother in California had passed away recently. And we, as a family, had to make a decision to put her in a nursing home. The government forced us to. She had dementia, and now she wasn't a threat to anyone, not even herself, but the problem was she kept calling the police department saying things were stolen from her house, and they were getting annoyed with the constant phone calls. And because of that annoyance, that's when they literally asserted their authority. And we pretty much had no choice. We looked into it, and it turned out under the laws of California, they were correct, and we, basically didn't really have a choice at that point. And she had dementia so bad that, and when we got to live with her, I don't live in California, neither does my dad. I'm in Missouri, my dad's in Minnesota. But anyone we got to live with her and take care of her, she would call the police on them and say that they were stealing her things, which is common in dementia. But at any rate, this was the case there. But the government actually has more authority over your life than you probably know. And it's things like this, stories like this that come up that actually kind of accent that. They really kind of give you an idea of what is the government's authority, what can they do under certain circumstances. And in this particular instance, I'm sure that what they did was 100% legal, but it shouldn't have gotten to that level. That's my point. So if you have unvaccinated kids and you take them to the doctor and they have a fever, remember this story. What it's like. Now, I'm not saying that every state is like this. Missouri is probably not like this, but Arizona apparently is. So keep it in mind. If you know people that have kids that are unvaccinated, be sure and let them know, share their story with them so they can understand, basically what may be at stake if they go to the doctor and they refuse the doctor's advice because the kid's unvaccinated. At, what level will the doctor go to, basically based on something that may or may not exist in the Affordable Care Act, or basically with the doctor's own personal morals. I just don't know enough about why the doctor called family services. I don't get that. I'm still struggling to try and understand that. But at any rate, this is the story I wanted to share with you guys, and I thank you for spending more. Once again, I get long-winded sometimes, and I apologize. But thank you for spending some time with us, and I hope you have a good evening.